Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. Today, let's go to Israel, Palestine, by way of upstate New York and Paris. Okay? I have two friends who are going to discuss the Middle East. They are both specialists on all kinds of Middle Eastern affairs. So I guess the word is really generalists who specialize in Middle Eastern affairs. And in upstate New York is Alon Ben Meir, who is a professor of, international relations at New York University. And in Paris is Bernard Driano, who is a friend that I've known a little bit for many, many years. Both of us were engaged in the Helsinki Citizens Assembly back during the end of the Cold War, and he still is involved with some sort of remnant of that organization. He is also the chair of something called the Center for Initiatives and Studies on International Solidarity, which I'm sure the real word is all in French, and I don't dare try to pronounce anything in French. Just a moment ago, I asked Alon what's on his mind these days, and he said he's thinking a lot about the future of Israel-Palestine and whether or not, in his opinion, the best solution in the long term is a confederation of three states.
Well, in the 90s and the 20s, early on, the discussion about the creation of independent Palestinian state was pretty much stands alone. That is, albeit at one point or another, they will have to cooperate and work with Israel. But the discussion was mostly an independent Palestinian state. But for the last nearly 30 years, 25 to 30 years, since the Oslo Accord, many conditions on the ground have changed so dramatically that makes the totally and completely independent two states, albeit in principle, has to be as such, but the level of cooperation between the two sides will have to be very extensive. And I base that on 5 different factors on the ground. Number one is the interspersed population of Israeli Palestinians. You see many Jews, nearly 700,000 in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, among nearly 3 million Palestinians. There is a cohabitation in the West Bank. If you look at Jerusalem, it has the largest community of Israelis and Palestinians, which are going to remain in place no matter what the ultimate solution may be. Then you have the Gaza, although there are no Israelis in Gaza, but Gaza depends on Israel for many things. Even if there would be peace between the two sides, the dependency and the relationship between Gaza and the West Bank will have to be created and maintained. And then you have, of course, 2 million, nearly 1.8 million Palestinian as Israeli citizens. So what you have this intermingling of population as a fact that you cannot by any means separate them. There is no way anyone can talk realistically about the possibility of separating. I mean, Jews in the West Bank largely will remain there. Maybe some will be relocated, but there will be a Jewish presence in the West Bank indefinitely. That's number one. Number two is national security concern. There is no way that Israel can satisfy its national security concern, as well as the Palestinian concern, without full collaboration between the two sides. Which means even today, before peace between the two sides, the Palestinian Authority and Israel collaborate regularly, daily, on all security matters. Which means in the future, that security will have to be maintained, and in fact, will have to be further expanded. That's number two. Then you have the future of Jerusalem. Both Israel, the Jews, and the Arabs and Palestinians, of course, have a very historic, biblical relation to the city of Jerusalem. And that is not going to change by the fact that the Aqsa Mosque, that is Haram al-Sharif, Aqsa Mosque with the Dome of the Rock, adjacent, juxtaposed to the Israeli Wailing Wall, that is the outside wall of the Second Temple. These two things will remain in place. Nobody would dare even touch that. And of course, the Haram al-Sharif is still under the Jordanian custodianship, and that too will remain in place. I think that means there must be a high level of cooperation between Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinians as far as Jerusalem is concerned. And then the fourth factor is that the Palestinian refugees. That is, the Palestinian refugees, there is no longer, for all intent and purposes, the right of return simply does not exist, which means the Palestinian refugees will have to resettle in their homeland, albeit that is the West Bank, and in Gaza, that is part of their homeland. So they are, what I consider them internally displaced rather than being refugees. And those who are in Jordan, by and large, are Jordanian citizens. Hence, actually, the reason why eventually, that is somewhere in the process, Jordan will have to join the confederation, also because of national security concern, which, of course, Jordan and Israel is at peace, and they already collaborate extensively on all national security issues. And so, and also 55% of the Jordanian population is Palestinian. So what you have Palestinians in Jordan, you have Palestinians in Israel itself, you have Jews in the West Bank. So what you have here, national security is going to be a major component of any peace process, any peace prospect in the future, where the three countries will have to collaborate. So when you look at all of these elements together, you have to ask yourself the question, how do you create a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, given these facts? Can you, in fact, unravel this? My conclusion is, under no circumstances can you change the status of Jerusalem, nor can you change the national security concern, nor can you change the interdispersed population of both sides. And as such, you have to create a kind of a system of the federation will be able to achieve a number of things. Allow for the Palestinian independent state to exist, but fully collaborate with Israel, so the Israelis maintain their independence completely, while protecting its democracy as well as Jewish national identity, which for the Israelis is critical. That can be done only under a confederation arrangement. So this is we have to keep that in mind. When you look at all of this, you need to ask yourself the question: what conditions can be created in order to satisfy all of these elements? And the final point I want to make, to suggest that they can sit down now and reach an agreement as such, that is a fallacy, because there is deep distrust between the two sides. There's a great deal of concern over the many extremist Palestinians who still never accept Israel's right to exist. So there are many Israelis who never still accept the need for a Palestinian independent state. But the facts remain, in order to mitigate those concerns, you need a process of reconciliation. That is before they can establish ultimately the confederation. Process of reconciliation means for 5 to 7 years is that government to government and people to people will begin to interact with one another on every single level in order to mitigate the distrust, in order to alleviate the psychological dimension, the impediment of the psychological dimension of the conflict, and also in the interim, make sure that the educational system and all of that are adjusted so that the next generation of Israelis and Palestinians begin to accept one another rather than see each other still as an enemy. One more point I just want to make, that is, when you begin the process of reconciliation, they'll have to only agree in the beginning that this should lead to a confederation, albeit it may take 6-7 years in order to get to that point. That is, the goal has to be established, and the process will lead them both to that goal. Obviously, they have to both make with some concession in order to reach such an agreement.
40 years ago, I had discussion with one of the founders of Fatah, Khaled al-Assad, about what could we expect for the future. It was not only with him, with other people, including people from a population, for example. And the idea at the end there will be a confederation was not a taboo. I mean, this idea, at the end, the solution would be some kind of confederation, and even in a broader way, which means also the integration of Israel in the region. I mean, it doesn't. It of course include Palestinians in Palestine, Palestinians outside Palestine, and they are not only in Jordan, and Israelis, of course. But of course, it has also something to do with the situation in the neighboring country. I mean, Syria and Lebanon. I never thought myself, I've never thought that Egypt had any importance in this story. And Iran, I mean, the real problem is local. But what are the obstacles? The obstacle is that now we are in a much worse situation than we were 30 years ago to achieve such goals, which of course would take a long time. From my own experience, I can see that real practical cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians are less existing than ever. There is a lack of trust, of course, of both sides, but there is, I mean, the idea, first we have, on the Palestinian side, first we have an independent state, then we can negotiate something more integrated. Doesn't seem realistic to most of the Palestinians because they have the impression that their independent states are fake. And if you say, we want the Palestinian authorities doesn't represent at all today the Palestinians. It used to be the case. It's no more the case. And of course, on the Israeli side, the extremists are much stronger than before. And anyway, this process is supposed to have the maximum circulation between people and the maximum cooperation possibilities and so on. So I see the point, but I don't see I don't see the way to proceed in such a way. And the fact that since now 30 years, it has been said by, let's say, progressists or by international community, the solution is two states. Well, the first thing that the international community should have done to have a two-state solution as a first step was to recognize Palestine as a full member of UN. I mean, at a political point of view, and to create some kind of legal equality between the two states. Nothing like that happens. I mean, there was a way like that in the Oslo Agreement, but the Oslo Agreement is dead. So how do we, of course, at the end, I don't see any kind of peace in the region if you have not some kind of integration. And in this integration, that means a close relation or system of cooperation between the population of Israel, Palestine, and Jordan, and the best relation possible between with Libya and Syria. But how to do that?
Your point are absolutely well taken, and I think you're correct in suggesting that whereas the solution eventually is feasible, the question is how to get to that point. And that is exactly the thrust of what I'm trying to suggest. That is, I elaborated on the ultimate solution, but how do you get to that point? And there are four different components to that. Number one is what I mentioned briefly, is that the process of reconciliation. That is, even the Biden administration appointed someone in the State Department, Omri, I don't know if you heard of him, with a clear mission. That is, we cannot sit down and negotiate now because of the distrust, because of hatred, because of so terribly very many bad experiences between the two sides. So what you need, begin to alleviate that alleviate the distrust and between the two sides, and begin to develop through confidence building measures. As a matter of fact, even the current Israeli government, led by Netanyahu, who openly oppose the establishment of a Palestinian state, he is convinced that the process of reconciliation is absolutely necessary, if for no other reason, but for security matters. So this is the discussion that's taking place in Israel today. The second component is the role of the United States. In my view, and the President Biden is very clear about this, Palestinian state is not negotiable, and he has already conveyed that to Bennett and other Israeli officials, that notwithstanding the complexities, the problem, the Israelis will have to come to that conclusion in one form or another. That is, and I agree with you here, the United States ought to exert somewhat more pressure on Israel to bring Israel to force Israel to come to that conclusion. The third element is the Arab state. The fact that Abu Dhabi, that is United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and the Sudan normalized relation with the state of Israel, in contrast to what the Arab Peace Initiative called for, that is, first is where Palestinian state to be created, and then the Arab state will recognize Israel. What they have deviated, what they have done here, very important thing, they gave Israel a test of how does it feel to have normal relation with other Arab countries other than Jordan and Egypt. And also, in the message to the Palestinian, you've got to moderate your position, or else the Arab state will continue, more and more Arab states will recognize Israel. So the Arab state, and I spoke to several leaders from Saudi Arabia, from Bahrain, certainly Morocco and others, and they were very clear. We normalized relation with Israel, but we made it abundantly clear to the Israelis, there will be no further annexation under any circumstances, or else we will withdraw our ambassador, and no expansion of further settlement, which the Biden administration also insists on it, and that the road to comprehensive regional peace must end with the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. So this is the three elements. That is the Arab state, the United States, that ought to be that, then the process of reconciliation, and then furthermore, that is the role of Egypt in particular. The role of Egypt is Egyptians know that, and the Hamas in particular, and all Palestinian extremists, jihadis and other groups, they can talk the big talk about destroying Israel. But in talking to them, and I wish I did, I can tell you categorically, they understand that Israel is there to stay. What they want from Israel is the acknowledgement that they exist and that they have right. And my position is that Israel Foundation was created by the resolution, United Nations Resolution 181, which called for the establishment of a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. That's what gave Israel legitimacy to exist as an independent state, and it is the same legitimacy that's been bestowed on the Palestinian. Israel does not have the legal right or any means by which to prevent what the international community have established, that is through the United Nations Security Council. And your point, however, the last point I want to make, which you are absolutely correct, to suggest it's time for more countries around the world to begin to recognize the Palestinian as an independent. Notwithstanding there is still a conflict between Israel and the Palestinian, but that will also send a clear message to Israel. And mind you, the international community is in one opinion. The Palestinians have the right to establish a state of their own. So now what they need to do to translate that into practical steps and say to the Israelis, if you don't move toward in that direction, we will begin the process of recognizing the Palestinian state. And mind you, Palestinian state is already an official observer at the United Nations. Their flag is already flying among other nations' flag. So the process has begun. Another question is, how do you bring the Israelis to this reality? And the element that I mentioned to you will bring this about over a period, hence the need for a process of reconciliation.
I'd like to ask some of the details about how this thing would look. First of all, I'd like you to explain to me the difference between a federation and a confederation, because I suspect that is the key to the answer. And then my vision of what you're proposing would be something like this, and tell me if I'm wrong, that wherever people live, if the Palestinians are living in let's say Jordan, or they could vote for as citizens of Palestine. If Israeli settlers are in the West Bank, they would vote as citizens of Israel, etc. So there would be 3 states with different populations scattered amongst each other, but those populations would all vote within their own, the state that corresponds to their national identity. Is that the basic idea?
Yeah, it's a very, very important and good question. In my proposal, I distinguish between citizenship and permanent residency. The permanent residents of Israelis, Jews in the West Bank, they are permanent residents. Other than the 3 blocks along the 1967 line, those settlers who will stay scattered here and there, they will be permanent resident of the Palestinian state, but they can vote or be elected in Israel itself if they choose to. That is where same thing happened with the Palestinian in Jerusalem. They are in Jerusalem. They travel freely throughout Israel, but they are not Israelis. So what happened? They are citizens of the Palestinian state, but they are permanent resident of Israel. That's what we will be established. And hence, in doing so, which is very, very critical, you maintain, both Israel and the Palestinian can maintain their national identity. Israel can maintain its Jewish national identity, and the Palestinian can maintain their national identity, since neither side want to be ruled by the other. So those who speak
that solves the first level of problem. But now there are, as I understand it, Palestinian citizens of Israel now who are Israeli citizens, right? And the Palestinians living in Jordan, I think you said that many of them or most of them have Jordanian citizenship.
Have become citizens.
So what would you do with cases where there's that discontinuity or the discrepancy?
No change whatsoever. Israeli Palestinian will remain Israeli citizens. There's no absolutely need to change their status whatsoever. Mm-hmm. The Palestinian in Jordan, who are already Jordanian citizens, there is no need for them to change their citizenship. However, any Palestinian can relocate to the Palestinian state by choice. And now, those who are still in refugee camps in Lebanon, some of them in Jordan, some of them in Syria, they should be either compensated and or relocated. And this is where the international community can play significant role. Some of them can go back to Israel and the family reunification. But now we're talking about thousands, not in the millions. So those who want to relocate, they should be provided with the means by which they can be relocated to their country, to the region, which is in the West Bank as well as Gaza. So this arrangement is so aware. It's in the making. Or what I'm suggesting in my proposal, that the international community begin now to raise the certain number of billions of dollars and offer the Palestinian compensation and or relocation in order to begin solve the long, agonizing, painful Palestinian refugee problem.
Mm-hmm. It's okay with me. I'm not sure how well that works. If you have large numbers of people who are citizens of another country but living within this territory, any one territory that's not their citizenship, then there could be a conflict of interest of some kind, I suppose. That, for example, are they going to pay? They will pay taxes to. Let's take the case of Israeli settlers in Palestine. Okay, they would have to, they'll be citizens of Israel, but they'll be
Correct.
paying their taxes to Palestine. They'll get their, let's say, healthcare and schooling, et cetera, from Palestine, and not from Israel. They will be in, except for how they vote, won't they be in effect living under the conditions? I mean, the potholes in their street will be the same potholes as the Palestinians experience, et cetera. So the issues that may come up as political issues for them to solve that are local in nature may not be something that you want aliens to be voting on.
Well, your point is very well taken as well, and it's a good point. That is, in my proposal, I am saying that those Israelis live in the West Bank ought to abide by the local rules of the Palestinian Authority, of the Palestinian state. That is, as long as they're living on Palestinian land, they have to abide by the local laws and rules in Palestine. So the Israeli Palestinian living in Israel, they abide by the laws and the rules of the Israeli government, just the same of the Jewish state, so to speak. So that is, it has to be a given, because you cannot have aliens, you call them, which is a good word for it, alien living in your country when they can do whatever they want to do. They can vote or be elected, but they need to adhere to local laws. And if they get making money in there, well, they'll have to pay taxes, local taxes as well. So these are the details that need to be worked out. But the principle of adhering to the local laws has to be established, because that will limit or will much of the confusion otherwise that will exist otherwise.
Just two things. First, what Adam said as a prospect, I mean, of course you can find solution. For example, if you take the European Union, you have people who are voting at the European election, even in their not national of the country, and you have it's totally possible to find solution. And of course, if you create some kind of confederal entity, you can imagine some for example, a common parliament or something like that. But that's the end of the process. My problem is we are very far from it, because nobody is at equal footing on such a question. And also, I don't think at all, but that's a personal opinion, that the Abraham Agreement, I mean, the fact that Gulf countries and Morocco will have any effect on such a prospect. The reason why there is this connection is geopolitical. It's because the Gulf countries are bothered with Iran, and they want to make an anti-Iranian alliance. And the Morocco, I can explain, but it's a bit long, because it's not only that. But personally, I've seen that there was relation between Emirates and Israel since a long time in practical terms.
This is true, and you're also right to suggest that the main motivation behind the Gulf state to cooperate and work and normalize relation with Israel is the common threat that comes from Iran. This is absolutely true. On the other hand, what the Palestinians are watching for, these countries, which also, mind you, without the blessing of Saudi Arabia, those normalization of relations would not have happened. But the Palestinians are fearful, and now when they speak to them, are very fearful that if this process continues and more Arab states recognize Israel, after all, for example, Sudan doesn't have much concern about Iran, nor does Morocco for that matter. So the Palestinians are concerned they'll be left to their own devices. And that is what they're terrifying them. If they are abandoned by the Arab state that they have been supported by for more than 70 years, who they will be able to turn to. And so there is that pressure on the Palestinians. And this pressure not being further exerted by the Biden administration. And my suggestion to the Biden administration is that open up, maybe begin a process of it, reestablish the mission of Palestinian Authority in DC, establish consulate, Palestinian American consulate in East Jerusalem. Take these kind of steps in order to move the process forward. So you're right to suggest we need steps. All these steps have to be in place because we will not be able to just establish a confederation overnight. That I cannot overemphasize the importance of the players who need to get together. The EU, the United States, certainly the international community in general, and is to support that kind of process. And I think they're coming slowly to that conclusion for a very important reason. For the EU and for the United States, the continuing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is destabilizing the region. It is allowing extremist groups, as well as Iran, to exploit the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians for their own benefit. And that is why the Biden administration made it clear to Bennett that continuation of the conflict, it's a terrible, it's bad for United States geostrategic interests in the Middle East, and it is also bad for Israel itself because the conflict instigates instability throughout the region, and that will have to come to an end.
Mm-hmm. What kind of political groups in Israel, Palestine have independently been promoting anything like this? Is this a brainstorm of Alan Ben Meir's, or are you party to a group of people who think the same way you do, and I haven't heard about them much until now?
You know, Bernard mentioned before, the talk about potential confederation is not new, and I'm not going to say this is my original idea. My idea, the originality of my idea is based on analyzing the ground, that is what's on the ground now, that makes that eventuality not only a possibility, but a must. And that is where I'm coming in terms of what I see, what players, who is going to play the role, what circumstances need to be created on the ground in order to move this process forward. Mm-hmm. Given the fact that when you look at all of it, you still have to come to the conclusion the two sides are stuck. They are stuck with one another. That is, coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians is not one of many options. It's the only option. They have to coexist. They can either have peaceful coexistence, or conflicted coexistence with a conflict. That is what's been happening for 73 years now. They coexisted while the way violence was repeatedly erupting between the two sides. So they have to make that choice. They cannot change the fact that they coexist side by side. This is not the fact that they can change.
Okay, now Bernard used the word two-state solution briefly, which makes me think that that's probably what you're still persuaded to support, Bernard. But how is that? You want to make your case for arguing that that is still an option, as opposed to what Alan is proposing. Is there still any hope left for a two-state solution? And if so, would you prefer that?
When I discuss with Palestinian friends, for example, and that's not new, I mean, it has been like that for a few years, which are more or less leftist Palestinians most of the time. They all say that the two-state solution, as the solution, is over. And one of the reasons is because the state of Palestine has not been even symbolically recognized by the Western world. The coexistence between Israeli and Palestinian could be also the fact that I can give you an example that, for example, just now there is a debate between Kosovo and Serbia with the new government in Kosovo, and the new government of Kosovo said we can open everything, we can go to the court about the war crime, including the war crime we did on our Kosovan side. Of course, the Serbian nationalists, which are now in power in Serbia, doesn't want to hear about that. But a lot of people say, okay, now we have a government, a majority in Kosovo who is ready to say, okay, let's solve the problem, let's solve the conflict. And there are still a big number of Serbians living in Kosovo, and you can see a process. Of course, then at the end, it is already a two-state solution, but mutual reconnection will come quite soon, I think. We are not in this process in Israel-Palestine, and anyway, the two-state solution can be a solution. It can be a step. If you want a confederation, you need an independent Palestinian state as a first step. But the independent Palestinian state will not be really independent. Even Jordan is not really independent. Jordan is a country which is totally financed by outside. I mean, if the Arabs, Americans, and Western money doesn't come to Jordan, in 3 months there is no more Jordan. If you create, there is an interdependence, and there is so the solution can't be two separate states with war separating them. So the process, the Palestinian state is the first step for a confederation. That's not, I mean, of course it's peculiar, it's a peculiar situation, but you have seen things like that in history in other regions. Now, the big problem we have now is to find the steps that could be done today. Because we have, as I said, we are in a worse situation than we were 20 or 30 years ago.
If I may, the confederation, it is exactly that. It is confederation between two independent states. So the Palestinians do not lose their independence, nor do the Israelis lose their independence. What the confederation does, basically, because of their proximity, because of their coexistence, no matter what, they need to collaborate. They do not give up any of their independence, but they need to collaborate. That is, the confederation, for example, require them to collaborate on security matters, collaborate on economic issues, but they do not. Then they do so by choice. They do not lose their independence under the confederation concept. This is very important. The difference between Kosovo and Serbia is that Kosovo, unlike the Palestinians, have been recognized by over 100 countries. So the Kosovars have no reason to believe or to think that whether Serbia recognized Kosovo now or in the long run, they want to be recognized by Kosovo only because one important reason. The EU made it conditional upon Serbia as well as Kosovo that if you want to integrate into the EU, you must resolve your conflict first. And that is, Serbia ought to recognize Kosovo as a precondition. But Kosovo does not have the same pressure because it is already, as I said, recognized by over 100 countries. And now the dispute between the two sides in terms of how to go about to bring Kosovo's recognition Serbia recognition of Kosovo. And I deal with these issues very regularly between the two countries. And I can tell you that given the fact that there's a pressure on Serbia by the EU, as well as pressure on Serbia by the United States, it's coming from in a variety of ways. The Serbian sooner or later will have to recognize one fact, that their campaign to de-recognize Kosovo by so many different countries is going nowhere, because they've been trying to de-recognize, trying to convince other countries to de-recognize Kosovo is going absolutely nowhere. And their hope for being integrated into the EU without recognizing Kosovo, it won't happen. And therefore they feel the pressure. what is happening there, Russia, now that's a problem, is Russia is putting tremendous pressure on Serbia because of historic affinity between the two sides, not to move, because Russia does not want Serbia to join the EU. That's for many obvious reasons. So, Bernard, you are so right in terms of how to bring this about. And like I said, that's the process I'm talking about. Now, what I'm suggesting here, it's a process between the two sides to reconcile their differences, but the process also includes interference by outside powers, namely the United States in particular, and the EU, who've been unanimously supportive of an independent Palestinian state, and they made that abundantly clear to the Israelis that they will not budge on this particular issue. And mind you, Israel is the biggest Europe is the biggest trading partner with Israel. So Israel has to listen. At one point or another, they have to listen to what the EU is saying, what the United States are saying, and of course, what the international community have been saying all along.
I agree. I mean, it's true that the difference between, of course, the situation is different anyway, but the difference between Kosovo and Serbia on one side and Palestine and Israel on the other side is that the international pressure for the recognition is real in the case of Serbia and Kosovo. It's not in the case of Israel-Palestine.
At this juncture, you're right, yes. But this is the whole idea that I'm pushing for, that is behind the back of my proposal, is that here are the steps they need to take, because their position is quite public. The United States support the establishment of independent Palestinian state. The EU support that. So what I am saying, take specific measures in that direction, which is not inconsistent with your public position. And I think, again, given their geostrategic interest in the Middle East and concern over the security in that interest, they are beginning to think in those terms. And hence, President Biden made it clear to the State Department, you've got to push for process of reconciliation between two societies to bring them closer, in order that at one point or another, 6, 7 years, whatever it takes, they will understand that the permanent, sustainable solution rests only on two independent states collaborating under a framework of a confederation.
Okay, what does a confederation mean then? What is the joint entity that would be Israel-Palestine? A confederation means that there's some polity that unites them, whereas they're otherwise independent states. Give me an example of a confederation that's existed in the world so that I'll have some basis for comparison. If you have independent states that nevertheless are in some sense united, give me a case showing how that works.
Well, let me say, a federation like the United States is a federal government, and that is the federal government. The various the 50 states have various autonomies on many issues. But for example, they have to relinquish their right for foreign policy that is conducted by the federal government. That is, the federal government here has jurisdiction over many issues concerning the various states, including foreign policy, national defense, intelligence, like FBI can intervene anytime they wish if there is interstate crimes is committed, etc., etc. So they are united in that sense, and so they are not free to do whatever they want to do. In the federation, and confederation between Israel and the Palestinians, or like any confederation, is voluntary collaboration between the two sides. That voluntary collaboration does impose some limits on their freedom of action, but it's very limited. That's because they want to collaborate on security. They want to collaborate on economics. They have mingled population. They don't have a choice. They have to collaborate on these issues, and that is the collaboration is voluntary, but it is necessitated by the conditions on the ground, and that is what's very important to keep in mind.
Okay, so the term confederation doesn't mean anything, the formation of an entity that would be recognized as a joint, two-party nation state or something.
No, it's seen as a simply two states agree to collaborate on many issues over which they have common interest. That's all it is.
How is that incompatible then with the original notion of the two-state solution? You still have two states, and what's the difference then?
A huge difference, because the interdisbursement of the population cannot be changed. So there is that kind of connection. Israelis will live in the West Bank. Palestinians are living in Israel. In Jerusalem, the community is intermingled, Israelis and the Palestinians. So you cannot separate the two. Mm-hmm. So whereas independence can be established, separation of the people cannot happen. Mm-hmm. And then again, in terms of security, whereas they can be independent, but their security they have a national security concern, both of them at the same time. And that is why the confederation concept is voluntary, where they can collaborate and cooperate on issues where they have both common interest. If you take Jerusalem as an example, Jerusalem, neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis want to divide Jerusalem again. As Jerusalem will remain a united city, albeit East Jerusalem will be the capital of the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian, and West Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. But since you cannot divide, neither the Palestinians or the Israelis want to divide the city, they must collaborate. Mm-hmm. They have to cooperate. The electricity, the grid, electrical grid the same, the roads are the same, the highways are connected, all of this is together. So they must collaborate. That's what I'm saying. So given what has transpired in the last 35 years on the ground, does not diminish the need of the Palestinian to have independent Palestinian state, but it has added this component that if you want an independent state, you need to collaborate, and that under the framework of confederation.
Okay, well, is there any place in the world where you have a situation of the kind that you've described, where a large segment of the population of each state actually votes as citizens of the other state and are not citizens of the state where they live, but the two states get along and cooperate? Is there such a case anywhere?
I can tell you there is. I think Bernard, you want to say something?
Yes, I want to say something about that. Of course, if we are trying to find something really existing that could be this sort of confederation between Israeli, Palestinians, and Jordanians, we won't find it. But for example, if you take the number of people who are voting in their own country and in their country of residence, it's depending on the kind of vote, it's tens of millions today, tens of millions.
Yes.
Well, look, here's a case. Bernard, I'm one of them. I'm a dual citizen of Canada and the US. But what that means is that I vote in both elections. And that's not what I think Alan is proposing.
No, but for example, you can imagine that you have a municipal election, a unified municipal election in Jerusalem, because it's a unified city, and different parliamentary elections.
The point is, if you manage, sorry, go ahead.
There is a situation like that in New Caledonia, for example, when you have it's not the same people voting for the different on the different topics. You can find an example. I mean, it's not impossible.
Yeah, just take Turkey, for example. Many Turks live in Europe. And with the last election, President Erdogan made it a point. He's calling on every single Turk living in Europe to vote in the election because he wanted every possible vote that he can muster. So it is a common thing, that Bernard is right. Tens of millions of people living in a different country, but vote in their country when there's an election. So this is not a new phenomenon. But if you can establish dual citizenship, and some Israelis and Palestinians would be able to do, for example, an Israeli Jew married an Arab woman, right? What is the what can she become an Israeli citizen? Under circumstances, yes, she can become an Israeli citizen. So there are rules and regulations about how you can acquire dual citizenship, even in this situation where Israel and the Palestinian, albeit, is not rampant. It's not going to be happening in the tens of thousands or in the millions, obviously.
Okay, bring in Jordan now, because Jordan is obviously the third wheel. This doesn't fit on this scheme. And I think probably most Jordanians, maybe including the king, would be astounded at the proposal. At least it's certainly not something I would have thought of. Maybe you do this thing in two steps. You try the Israel-Palestine deal before adding the Jordanian deal. Tell me how you see Jordan's role in this whole thing. Are they expendable, or are they an essential component of it?
Are you asking me or not?
Well, it's your idea, really.
Okay. No, because I don't want to. Jordan is a critical component. Why? First of all, it is at peace with Israel, and there is extensive security collaboration, economic collaboration between the two countries. As a matter of fact, if any foreign country intervened in Jordan, internal affairs, Israel is the first one to protect Jordan. That's how close, how committed Israel to Jordanian sovereignty. That's number one. The Jordanian population has 55% of its population are Palestinian origin. So for them, they have that kind of the population has also close affinity to their brothers in the West Bank, in Israel proper, and in Gaza and elsewhere. So this is a natural relationship between the two sides. The third component is that Jordan is very much involved today. It's, for example, Jordan is a custodian of the holy places, Muslim shrines in Jerusalem. That is a situation that's been involving Jordan all along. Under confederation, Jordan will continue to be involved, to be the custodian of the Muslim holy shrines in Jerusalem. That's another factor. The fourth one, some Israelis used to think in terms of, well, Jordan is Palestine because it has a majority of Palestinians. The confederation concept eliminates that possibility, because there is no need to talk about Jordan is Palestine. Palestine is independent, Jordan is independent, and they're collaborating under the framework of confederation. So Jordan is a natural part of this scheme. It's not a scheme, it's a proposal. It's very much part of it. Now, where this negotiation with Jordan start immediately or after some of the clutter being discussed with the Palestinian, and the Israelis and Palestinians reach a certain modus operandi, a year or two, and then bring Jordan into, but Jordan will have to be involved from day one in terms of being informed on a regular basis about the progress being made between Israel and the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. Bernard, you get the last word.
I said it's a long way to go there. And I would just emphasize something. A part of the solution is in the end of the Western countries. European Union at first, because European Union has the means to make pressure immediately. I mean, even they have the legal text to do that with the agreement, cooperation agreement between Israel and European Union, but they don't do it. They did anything. And of course, United States. But as I am a European, I will, including my own government, because if I take the position that the French government had on such a question 25 or 30 years ago, and then we don't, then nothing, then they just make rhetorics and no concrete move, etc. So part of the solution, part of the way to go, because that means pressure on the, the interest of Europe, of course, to do that.
Okay, well, this has been a fascinating conversation, even though I have been able to hear all of it. So thank you for being here, and thank you, Alan. It's a brilliant idea. I'm perfectly open to the idea. I think it may be indeed the best answer. So thank you both. Okay.
Thank you, Bernard, for meeting you this way. I look forward to seeing you in person.
Yeah.
And I promise when I'm in France next time, if I may, I will call on you when perhaps we can get together for a drink.
Okay, very good idea.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.